Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Kavat. Beijing is threatening the death penalty for so-called Taiwanese separatists, saying that it will sentence them in Chinese courts even if they are absent. Joining us to discuss this today are Professor Myron Cohen, Columbia University Department of Anthropology, Professor Emeritus, who has been studying Han-Chinese society for 60 years, and Andrew Nathan, Columbia University class of 1919, Professor of Political Science, a pioneering American sinologist of more than 50 years, and a protégé of John King Fairbank, founder of Harvard University's East Asian Research Center. A very warm welcome, and it's a great privilege to welcome you to the show today.
Thank you.
Thank you, yes.
Professor Nathan, let's take a look at the legal opinion which was released on guidelines against Taiwan independence or pro-independence activists, which threaten punishment up to the death penalty. These are the acts which Beijing says can be tried and punished: forming a Taiwan independence organization or program, directing people to carry out activities that split the country or undermine national unity, attempting to change the legal status of Taiwan as a part of China by law, attempting to create two Chinas or one China, one Taiwan in the international community by promoting Taiwan's membership in international organizations that require statehood, or by engaging in official exchanges or military contacts with other countries. So Nathan, what do you make of all this? How seriously do we need to take it?
It's part of mainland China's what you might call lawfare, right? So their strategy toward Taiwan is multidimensional. There's the economic strategy, which is to create more dependence by Taiwan. There's the military threat strategy. There's the strategy in other capitals of trying to break diplomatic relations with Taiwan and so forth. And then the lawfare part of it is, for example, the anti-separatism law that they passed, I forget when. Lawfare is to take their claim that Taiwan is a part of China and there is only one China, and then spell out the legal ramifications of that to consolidate the idea that this is a body of law and we really mean it. I think that's what it stands for right now. I think as well, it's a kind of political threat to, not to the top leadership of Taiwan because they are, as it were, too committed already, but to those who may want to cooperate with them in some way. And in that respect, it has the typical vagueness of Chinese law, which is that we don't know who it applies to, and we don't even know what the crimes consist of. In that respect, it's similar to the national security law in Hong Kong, which gives you 5 crimes, and the crimes are very vaguely defined and who it applies to. But in the case of Hong Kong, as you know, they ended up really arresting people. In the case of Taiwan, since they don't control Taiwan, what they're saying is, if you're a smaller player down the line and you are thinking about whether to cooperate with the government of Taiwan or not, you'd have to think about, what if China does get control? Then are they going to come after me at that point? So it has that threat element for the future.
So you think it's for the future? You think that it needs to wait for a period, for the time when China actually controls Taiwan, so not now?
I mean, not now. It's a threat for people who may feel that they have a choice of doing any of these things. And then they have to think, will I regret this in 20 years from now? But in terms of actually sentencing somebody to jail or for death penalty, that's not now.
They said they would do it in absentia, though.
Oh, yeah, that's true. And so...
and Taiwan's government has essentially told Taiwanese not to travel to China, obviously, Hong Kong and Macau. So they appear to be taking it as pretty serious.
Well, that's true. They have arrested, as you know, in the past, some Taiwan residents for human rights activities and so forth. So it is, and they've arrested, I mean, they have engaged in hostage diplomacy with Australia and with the United States and with certain companies. So they are, if you show up in mainland China, they're totally capable of arresting somebody for any reason.
What do you make of the extradition countries, though? For example, Thailand, which has extradited people from Hong Kong before.
Yeah, and Thailand has extradited Uyghurs, and some of the other, Malaysia has done so, and other countries have done so. So yes, it does have that.
Professor Cohen, as Professor Nathan mentioned, this is the law is premised on the fact that Taiwan is part of China, which obviously Taiwan rejects. From your extensive field studies on both sides of the strait, and the decades of research, can you tell us how you approach this issue of whether Taiwan is part of China?
Well, in a sense, I don't approach the issue in the sense that the issue is not something dealing with cosmic forces. The issue is totally dealing with human opinion, and human opinion politically based and due to a variety of cultural circumstances. So that whether or not one views Taiwan as part of China is precisely, it's a view, but it's certainly not rooted in some kind of natural position. So my own position is as I observe that there is a conflict over that issue, and I accept it as a conflict, and one of course is interested in the reasons for the conflict.
So would you like to tell me about the importance of Taiwanese identity into perhaps this issue, or whether you believe there is no link?
Oh, I think there's an extraordinarily powerful link. I think now we're getting down to the realm of human activity, and there is indeed a strongly felt Taiwanese identity. Taiwanese identity is a very interesting issue because it is framed within a particular political context of island Taiwan. There are certain exceptions. There are certain people here who advocate that Taiwan is part of China. They advocate it, okay. But the point I'm making is that the entire discussion there's no God-given definition of the situation.
Okay, how about how political participation of the Taiwanese since Taiwan democratized, and even the middle class, what sort of influence has that had on the Taiwanese identity?
Well, I think it's an extremely powerful influence because participation always brands you in a very positive way. So I think we have to look back historically. Taiwanese identity began to form when Taiwan was ceded to Japan. It's very old, and under the Japanese there were a variety of developments. But then, of course, you had the tumult following Japan's surrender, and in many cases, a Taiwanese identity, in some cases, was forced upon the Taiwanese precisely by the actions of other parties. Taiwanese identity, again, has been congealing within this larger social and political framework. And in many cases, Taiwanese identity is now just taken for granted. It's not, people don't say, oh, I am Taiwanese, and walk down the street worrying about it. But it's part of it's stamping people's personality, yes.
I mean, there is a link, isn't there, between Taiwanese identity and then perhaps self-determination, which comes under the UN Charter.
Well, there's a link, yes, yeah. But again, that's the domain of legality. But I'm referring more to a social cultural framing of Taiwanese identity.
Okay, Professor Nathan, going back to the legal opinion or the guidelines, how successful do you believe China will be? I mean, how useful has this move been in terms of moving towards their ultimate goal, which is reunification with Taiwan?
Well, linking up to this discussion of identity, but I suppose also anxiety in this case, I think when people speak about Taiwanese identity right now, it's mainly political. rather than cultural. I mean, I think Taiwanese people think of themselves as part of Chinese culture the way that Singapore people are Chinese as well, but or Chinese Americans are, Chinese in that sense.
But Singapore's a good example, though, Professor, isn't it?
Singapore?
Yeah. Because Singaporeans would say, I'm Singaporean.
Yeah, politically. So I think as mainland China has put more and more pressure on Taiwan, then the counter thing is, no, I'm not you. I don't identify with you in the mainland. I'm Taiwanese. And that is in the political sense that I'm Taiwanese. So I think the law that not law, but interpretation that you mentioned, threatening Taiwanese people for their acts to assert their identity tends to consolidate or strengthen that identity. So if I'm thinking about engaging in one of the acts under that law, and I don't remember what they are now, but colluding with foreign forces, I might be afraid to do it, and I might pragmatically refrain from doing that thing. But in my subjective identity, it would probably make me feel more non-mainland Chinese.
Yes. And I'm just interested to hear from you what else you think, what other consequences you think might happen that we might see in the months or even years ahead. I mean, firms, businesses are obviously thinking of relocating their Taiwanese staff from China. Would this eventually influence them in terms of the company's location in China? More and more Taiwanese obviously are staying away from China, as we said. So that would seem to go against what Xi Jinping wants, which is the so-called peaceful reunification of these two peoples.
Yes, and it's not only the Taiwanese who are leaving China, but because the Chinese security state is so unpredictable, it's not really a rule of law, and they can arrest anybody. Often, for some other reason, they arrest people for some commercial dispute, and then they claim that they're engaged in intelligence operations and things of that kind. So the American and European firms are also removing personnel from China, partly for this reason and partly because the business environment is worse. And as you said, the Chinese government is saying, we're open for business, we welcome foreign engagement, and specifically with respect to Taiwan, they've had a strategy since 1979 of Taiwan Tongbao having special privileges in the mainland. You can come here and make money. So this, as you said, absolutely, it's a contradiction.
Professor Cohen, you studied China and Taiwan, as we said, for decades. So I wanted to get your view. Is a statement that Xi Jinping often makes. He says that the will of the 1.3 billion Chinese is to reunify with Taiwan. It's all part of this Chinese dream. However, these are his words, and there's no reliable public surveys that give us an insight. From your field work there and experience in China, can you provide any insights?
Well, obviously, to say that 1.4 billion Chinese, including every baby, every Tibetan, every Mongolian, it's nonsense. Okay, it's just a slogan. It translated would be something like I want Taiwan. Okay, but as far as actual sentiment is concerned, I've done field work over the years in North China, in Hebei, and in Sichuan and near Shanghai, and I've traveled in Guangzhou elsewhere. I think that most Han Chinese probably do want reunification with Taiwan, but I don't think it's a big deal for them. They watch Taiwan television in Xiamen and areas like that. They enjoy it. In part, they take Taiwan's existence for granted, as part of the local scene. Okay, they're not about. If you ask them, and I haven't, but if you ask them, oh, are you willing to send your sons on an invasion of Taiwan? I suspect most would say no, 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 no. You see, in other words, so it's really a kind of a meaningless statement that was made. I think that local officials the ones that I've dealt with are rather sensitive about this matter. And there's a kind of a strange culturalism. Because Taiwan culture and our culture is the same culture, we have a right to Taiwan. So, for example, when I was doing fieldwork in North China, I was chatting with a local cadre saying, oh, I've done fieldwork in Taiwan. And I said something, and he said, "Oh, it's like the same thing, isn't it?" I say, and this guy was, a very strong communist fellow, and I said, "Well, in Taiwan they worship ancestors," and he said, "Oh, we worship ancestors too." That's the first thing he said. We worship ancestors. Again, this notion of commonality.
I know that as part of your many years of research, you've looked into the concept of nationalism on both sides of the strait. Would you say that it is rising?
Well, nationalism in China is a very interesting issue because it blended with Han nationalism, which is not the same thing. In other words, the notion of the Chinese nation state, which we defend, is linked to a tradition that's now being made explicit by many people in China, saying that the Manchus corrupted China. Earlier, the Mongols corrupted China. It's linked to the Hanfu movement, people wearing Han Dynasty clothing, supposedly. So it's a nationalism, but it's a culturally Han nationalism. And that is for me, that's very indicative because when we talk about nationalism, we talk about the kind of symbols that attract national interest. They have not yet created a symbolism of Chinese nationalism, which is pan-Chinese. And Xi Jinping is now trying to do it through Sinicization, which is, Zhongguo Hua, this movement that Muslim halal restaurants have to wipe out the Arabic script, that churches have to remove crosses, that all religion has to be within the framework of state-controlled religion. Some of the historical roots of Chinese nationalism, like for example, the 19th century humiliations by the Opium War. These humiliations again are Hanified. They're made Han humiliations, and the Manchus are partly responsible for this. So to answer your question, I think that Chinese nationalism is powerful. Really powerful, but it is I wouldn't say compromised because it is what it is, but it is framed within this Han nationalistic context. Xi Jinping's solution to that is to identify everybody as Han. That's what he's doing or trying to do. Whether he succeeds or not is another matter. As far as Taiwan is concerned, I think there is a very strong sense of national identity, and I think that as we've already discussed, the greater the hostility from China, the more the growth of this feeling. I think that these laws, by threatening to execute Taiwanese, does not reduce the force of Taiwanese nationalism, but rather enhances it. So there's an interesting issue in Taiwan in terms of national identification, because it is the Republic of China. And it's Sun Yat-sen who is in the presidential palace, which makes historical sense. But again, there's an issue here of symbolizing nationalism. Now, one thing that is fascinating to me is that Sun Yat-sen himself and the earlier symbols of the Republic of China are being Taiwanized. In other words, the Republic of China now is Taiwan. And Sun Yat-sen in a way is Taiwan, even though of course he's also recognized it's being Taiwanized, so that the pre-existing symbols are being reinvented in a Taiwan context, and that to me is again a symptom of strong Taiwanese nationalism.
Do you believe that Xi's narrative and the CCP, professors talked about this before, that, the West or other countries are out to get us, they don't want us to rise. This narrative, is that enabling a pan-China nationalism?
I think that narrative is part of a very old narrative of the West. Again, that's the Opium War narrative. That's the Opium War narrative, the Great Humiliation. There is no doubt that is a crucial element in Chinese nationalism. And I remember even maybe about 10 or 15 years ago, I was giving a talk, and I was saying to somebody, many Chinese people have still not gotten over the Opium War. It's still a sore in them. And this person said, "Oh, that's nonsense. It was a long time ago." And a moment later it came up, "No, it's true." and this notion of national humiliation, I think, is beginning to wear off at this point. But it was a very, very strong element in building Chinese nationalism. So if you have a Chinese nationalism which is linked to a perception of the assault on China, not to speak of World War II, with the perception of the assault on China, a perception of Western colonial domination, and the humiliating defeat of the Chinese state, of the Chinese Qing state, by the various forces, the two Opium Wars, the Boxer Uprising, one thing after another. That is one of the major foundations of Chinese nationalism. So obviously, that kind of a nationalism will be very suspicious of the West. Yes.
Yeah, and is that the core of the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation?
Exactly. Yeah. Rejuvenation from what? From the humiliation. Exactly. Yes.
So it's the revenge narrative, isn't it? Professor Nathan, back to the death penalty, the threat of death penalty. You mentioned that one of the guidelines identified was collusion with foreign organizations. Do you think there's any consequences for the international community itself?
You mean if I collude with Taiwan kind of thing?
Yeah.
The Hong Kong national security law has extraterritorial effect and is written in such a way that it can apply to non-citizens. And this extraterritorial use of law is, again, something that the Chinese have learned from the United States. The United States has increasingly adopted laws that are extraterritorial in effect. And so China believes that if you can do it, we can do it as well. But I haven't read this particular document.
And finally, Professor Cohen, can you tell me what are some of the major cultural transformations that you have seen during your 6 decades?
In Taiwan?
In Taiwan.
Right. Well, when I first came to Taiwan, I lived for a year in Taipei. And I lived in a Japanese house. The city was loaded with Japanese-style houses. My landlady got me fresh tatami, so that you had the Japanese cultural presence. It's very interesting. The Japanese cultural presence was physically enormous. Culturally, it had been wiped out by the, not wiped out, but repressed by the nationalist regime then. Xincheng Nanlu was known as, in English, was Canal Road, because there was a huge drainage ditch right in the middle of it. Water buffalo would be coming in with carts, bringing into Taiwan, so that Taiwan was an underdeveloped area at that point. When I went to do my fieldwork in South Taiwan, this is again in 62, 63, 64, those first 3 years, I was amazed to find these enormously extended families. 30, 40, 50 people, one family, not just generally kin, but sharing a common budget. These large extended families were gone maybe 10 years later. But what's happened now, of course, is that these things gave way to smaller families, not necessarily smaller demographically in terms of children, but smaller simply because the extended family broke up into more these nuclear families, or just husband, wife, and kids families. But the trend has continued to somewhat alarming proportions, because now the issue is not small families. The issue is, are we having any families at all? And as I've said in other contexts, this is not just in Taiwan, it's part of an East Asian pattern. In a way it's global, but it's not completely global because there's something characteristic about East Asia, in my opinion, which is behind some of this, and that is the coexistence of a still present male bias, patrilineal bias, with the rising status of women. The two do not mesh. In fact, they're in conflict with each other. And one result is a reluctance to get married on the part of many women. It is the Chinese heritage, which applies not only to China, but to Japan, to Korea, and of course to Taiwan.
That's fascinating. And in Taiwan, we are meant to have some of the best gender equality across Asia. So that would seem to give Taiwan some hope.
The issue is gender equality maintaining or growing in strength and the male bias receding. The two have to happen together. And I think in Taiwan you still have that male bias issue in spite of gender equality, which is the whole point.
And what's the solution? Is it only time?
Yeah, I mean, I think there better be a solution because otherwise you got real problems. And the other side of that, of course, is the aging society. And here you have Japan, Taiwan, China, etc.
Can I add another factor for East Asia?
Yes.
Generally low immigration compared to the West.
Low
immigration levels.
I think that is a very important element too. In other words, that might be a counterforce, but it hasn't happened. Yes.
We'll have to end it there. Thank you so much for joining our show today, Professor Cohen, Professor Nathan.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.